They say that music has the power to bring people together across languages and cultures, but when my dwarves forced Zuspgas vice patterns into an early retirement last video, they demonstrated that when your performances are bad enough, the opposite can actually be true, and your music can drive people away. For a while I toiled away trying to improve my dwarves' musical prospects in preparation for the musical finale of this fortress, but no matter how many times I dropped a piano on their heads or locked them in the elven instrument puzzle room, they weren't really improving faster than I was killing them. Which is why I decided to stack the deck in my dwarves' favor for their final performance by creating an audience entirely made up of hostile and annoying enemies. That way my dwarves would successfully irritate them with their songs whether they performed well or not. It was a guaranteed win for my dwarves and a guaranteed loss for my enemies. Or at least I thought it would be. While we already had cage traps up on the surface to capture some of the goblins from their yearly sieges, I only really knew what was happening in 1.5 of my 3 caverns. Cavern 1 had been mostly revealed during the construction of my farm, and Cavern 3 had been partly revealed when I sacrificed a miner to the magma chute, but Cavern 2 remained a mystery. So I started things off by digging down from my fortress to the enemy-rich cavern layers below. Once I was down in Cavern 3, I dug out a secondary barracks for the fortress that would keep my soldiers closer to all the new danger zones we were opening up, and built a hallway full of traps for adventurous enemies to wander through. Up in Cavern 2, I planted traps all around the area by the staircase, and dug out an animal stockpile that could hold all my enemies. And then in Cavern 1, I used the door I already had in place to go out and plant a couple traps that would hopefully capture anything getting a little too close to the farm. With the traps in place, I had nothing left to do but neglect my dwarves and wait for enemies to wander a little too close to my fortress. But once they started getting trapped, and we started going out to retrieve them, we also had to start fighting off enemies that were a bit too big for our cage traps. Over the course of the 5 years I spent trapping and retrieving creatures from the caverns, we managed to fill up both the original animal stockpile and a backup that I built down in Cavern 3 with trolls, ogres, cave crawlers, jabberers, golaks, crundles, serpent people, and way more. But keeping those creatures alive so they could reach my traps meant that when a forgotten beast came calling, I had to go fight it, and we wound up having to kill 6 forgotten beasts across the 5 years. Though the worst of it was the spring of 222 when I faced 3 forgotten beasts in 3 months. The first was an eyeless, fire-breathing crocodile that burnt the cavern to a crisp and seemingly vaporized 3 of my soldiers in its quest to get into my fortress. The second was a one-eyed, 8-legged frog that led both my soldiers and quite a few confused citizens into a fight against some serpent people. And the third was a gigantic skinless sheep that set up shop in a tree and rained fire and terror down on anyone who dared enter its domain. Though it turned out to be stuck in the tree, so once it had killed all my best soldiers, I just stopped trying to attack it. In addition to the forgotten beasts, we also had semi-frequent run-ins with animal people. Sometimes incidentally, like the serpents we stumbled on while chasing the frog, but sometimes intentionally, like when an army of reptile people, war jabberers, and voracious cave crawlers took offense to us retrieving our cages down in the 3rd cavern. Animal people never really posed a threat to the fortress, mostly just to my recruits, but their presence down in the caverns kept my soldiers far away from the surface, where we had deadly semi-mega beasts like ettins, giants, and cyclops to deal with. One ettin in particular managed to get close enough to kill 6 dwarves before he was eventually put down. Unfortunately for me, I never managed to catch a giant cave spider that could be used to web my cage traps so I could catch some of the forgotten beasts. And fortunately for the semi-mega beasts, they never happened to enter my territory through one of the sides of my map full of traps, and so I wound up with a collection of creatures more irritating and annoying than truly deadly. But being annoying was still enough of a crime in my book for me to continue with my plan, and so once I had enough enemies in my stockpiles to fill up the jail design I had in mind, I went to work building a new tavern for my dwarves' final performance that would keep my enemies within earshot. The first design I tried used floor bars to cover up holes that went down to the prison cells below. I liked the idea that my dwarves would be walking around, chatting, and singing freely up above, while the creatures down below would be forced to suffer the indignity of having wine spilt on them while experiencing the horrors of dwarven music. But unfortunately, dwarves are capable of looking down at what's beneath their feet, and when what's beneath their feet scares them, they are far more interested in running away than in singing. So I pivoted to building the tavern below the monster jail and put the floor bars around the edge of the jail room so that they could still be tortured by the songs. With this new design, I had a whole floor up above that I didn't know what to do with anymore, and so I tried my hand at making terrible pixel art before pivoting to a much more practical booze stockpile. While everything in this setup seemed good to me, it turned out that when the monsters were released, some dwarves could sneak a peek at them by standing at the edge of the room, which of course they did. At first it seemed like this might require another redesign, but I saw that my dwarves were still making the effort to recite poetry, tell stories, and even make music, despite the stress. The music was probably bad, though for that kind of specific feedback you really need adventure mode, but of the 4 dwarves involved in the performance, the planter was simulating a Jurust, the peasant was simulating a Bisek despite there being one in one of the tavern chests across the room, the ranger was singing despite that being her worst musical skill, and the bookbinder was having no reaction to the music, probably because he had next to no musical ability. The performance in general just seemed quite haphazard and shoddy, which I'm sure was irritating to my enemies above, though most of their thoughts were about the danger they thought they were in from seeing so many hostile creatures. Overall, I would have to declare this final performance a success, and with it the entire Musical Fortress project. I built instruments, fostered a musical environment, and then tortured my enemies with songs and companionship. As far as I'm concerned, that's a successful Musical Fortress. Sure, my dwarves were neglected for the 5 years I spent capturing creatures and fighting forgotten beasts, and now I was also torturing them along with my enemies, but I'm sure they'll be fine if I ever get a chance to come back to this fortress in adventure mode. Fingers crossed that building destroyers don't regain the ability to destroy buildings anytime soon, I guess. Thank you for watching, an extra thank you to those of you who support me on Patreon, and I'll see you next time.